This is a New Year message for those experiencing gaps in your life. This is a message for those in the breach. You're underwater. No, not like this or this, but like this. This, this, or this. You're underwater. A saying that means your debt on something is bigger than the value of that something. It means that your loan on it is greater than your equity in it. Basically, you owe more than it's worth, which is often referred to as being in the hole or being upside down. And that difference between what you owe and what it's really worth creates a disparity, a gap, a breach. A breach is a tear, a rupture, a crack, a break, a separation between things that should line up, things that should match up, things that should balance, things that should be level, things that should be one, things that should be whole. But instead, there's a space affixed between. A breach is that space between what you have and what you desire. A breach is that space between where you are and where you need to be. A breach is that space between what you've sown and what you've reaped. That space between all you invested and the little to no return. That space between what you put into it and what you got out of it. That space between what you thought would happen and what actually happened. That space between how you thought they should have treated you and how they actually treated you. That space between what they agreed to do and what they actually did, also known as a breach of contract. That space between what you hoped would be and how it actually is. That space, that gap, that's the breach. And so many of us have those kinds of spaces, those splits, those tears, those divides, those voids, those gaps, those breaches in our lives. So many of us are in a breach right now. In that space, that gap I'm talking about, I know you know it when you see it. I know you know it when you feel it. Your mind knows, your soul knows when things just aren't adding up for you in life. You can feel the emptiness. You can feel when something is just off. You can feel when something's missing. Yeah, your heart knows when you're in a breach. Proverbs 13:12 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. A gap, a breach makes the heart sick. The Apostle Paul says in Romans 8:24, hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? When there's no gaps, no breach, then there's no need for hope. My wife Amanda shared a great message in the early days of this ministry called The Gaps Are Being Closed. And you should go back and check it out when you can. But when the gaps in your life are all closed, there's no need for hope. But the reason why we have to hope so much, so often in life, is because oftentimes there are a lot of gaps, a lot of breaches in our lives. Gaps between our goals and our reach, gaps between our objectives and our ability to execute, gaps between our aspiration and our implementation, gaps between our fruitfulness and our futility, gaps between our expectations and our reality, gaps between how it is and how it ought to be. And when those gaps persist, when a breach remains, it creates a valley of hopelessness, a valley of broken dreams, a valley of closed doors, a valley of not this time, a valley of maybe next year or the year after that or the year after that or maybe the next year after that, a valley of deferred hope. For many people, this new year 2023 is going to be a year of gaps, a year where a lot of people will feel like no matter how hard they try, they're still coming up short. A year where a lot of people will feel like they're in the hole. A year where a lot of people will feel like they're in an upside down situation. A year where a lot of people will feel like they're underwater. A year where a lot of people will feel like they're in the valley. A year where a lot of people will feel like they're in a breach. But there's a lily in the valley. He'll be your strength when you're worn. He'll be a place to leave your burdens. He'll be your shelter from the storm, a place where you trade your dark skies for beaming rays of sunshine. I found the lily in the valley, and he blooms all the time. So this is a message for those experiencing a valley in your life. This is a message for those experiencing a gap in your life. This is a message for those in the breach. When people are underwater and alone, when they're stuck in a financial breach, many insurance companies will offer what is known as gap coverage, where you get insurance to cover the difference between what you owe and what it's worth. Insurance to cover the gap. Well, when you're in a valley, when you're in a void, a divide, when you're in a breach in life, God has amazing gap coverage to cover his people. King David said in Psalm 37:25, I was young and now I am old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken, nor their children begging bread. And King David famously says in our text verse, Psalm 23:4, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. There, David is painting a beautiful picture of God's gap coverage. David is showing us that our God is comfort in the valley. He's covering in the valley. He's care like no other in the valley. He's peace that surpasses all understanding in the valley. He's joy that the world didn't give, so the world can't take away in the valley. He's hope in the valley, a reason to hold on in the valley. In all things, working all things together for your good in the valley. He's manna in the valley, provision in the valley, a way when there seems to be no way in the valley. He's a wonderful counselor to keep you from losing your mind in the valley. He's a keeper in the valley, a sustainer in the valley, a very present help in the time of valley, and the good shepherd of his sheep. Yes, even in the valley. Oh, this is a message for those in the breach. God never promised that there wouldn't be gaps sometimes. So we really need to stop expecting to have a no gap, gapless life all the time. But what he did promise was to keep you in the gaps, to be with you always, even in the breach. And he's a man of his word. God himself will be your gap insurance. He himself will be your gap coverage. Yes, this is a message for those in the breach. In 2023, when the enemy comes in like a flood, God's got you. When the ground beneath your feet gives way, God's got you. When you feel like you're going under, sinking to rise no more, God's got you. When your world feels like it's falling apart, he will make it fall into place. God's really got you. This is a message for those in the breach. Be not dismayed, whatever betide, God will take care of you. Beneath his wings of love abide, God will take care of you. Yes, God will take care of you through every day, over all the way. He will take care of you. God will take care of you. This is a message For those in the breach, blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Jesus, our great reconciler. Jesus, our great bridge. Jesus, our great repairer of the sin breach between us and God through his once and for all sacrifice on Calvary's cross. Jesus, who knows all about our struggles. Jesus, who knows the weight, the sting of life gaps himself. For we have not a high priest who cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but one who in every way was tempted as we are, yet without sin. Jesus, who walked in our shoes. Jesus, who walked in the gaps of life himself. Jesus, who walks with you even now in your life gaps. Oh, this is a message for those in the breach. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. This is a message for those in the breach. But thou, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory, the lifter of my head. I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. Oh, this is a message for those in the breach. I don't care how long you've been down in it. You ought to still declare by faith, I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. You see, you've got to change how you talk in the valley. You've got to change how you talk in the gaps of life. You've got to change your speech in the breach. Don't just speak to a friend or even just to yourself to encourage yourself, but speak to the breach. Don't just tell God how big the gap is. Tell the gap how big God is, like Jesus did when he stood up in the middle of the boat. You stand up in the middle of the breach and speak to the storm. Tell it, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Tell it, this may be my now, but it is not my forever. For I know my God won't let me die down here. He won't let me perish in the gap. He won't let me perish in the breach. Tell it in due time, in due season, just like Jesus wasn't left to rot in the tomb, just like death couldn't keep him in the ground. He's not going to let me stay stuck in the breach, but at the appointed time, the stone has got to roll away. And like my Jesus, I'm coming out. I'm getting up and I'm getting out, no matter how long it lingers. Don't be tempted to curse God and die in the breach like Job's wife told him to do. But instead, like Job, declare, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Don't get mad at God in the gap. Get mad at the gap. Prophesy to the gap, O son of man. Prophesy to the breach, O daughter of Zion. Tell it, storm, you can't last in my life. Breach, you can't stay in my life. Tell it, this too shall pass. Tell it, I'm so glad. Trouble don't last always. Tell it, weeping may endure for the night, but my joy is coming in the morning. Tell it, though trouble's in my way and I may have to cry sometime, I know Jesus, he will fix it after a while. I know my Jesus will close the gap. I know my Jesus will repair the breach after a while. Oh, this is a message for someone, somebody, somewhere in the breach. Somebody who's experiencing a health breach. Somebody who's experiencing a financial breach, a debt to income breach, a monthly budget breach. Somebody who's experiencing a relationship breach, a marital breach, a family in-house, in-home breach. This is a message for somebody who has so many gaps that you've lost count, so many gaps that you feel like your boat is taking on water, so many gaps that you feel like you're capsizing, so many gaps that you feel like you're going down with the ship, so many gaps that you feel like you're underwater. This is a message for those in the breach. If his eye is on the sparrow, if he dresses the lilies, if he feeds the beast in the field, how much more will he watch over you? How much more will he clothe you? How much more will he care for you? It doesn't matter how many gaps arise in this new year or how many valleys you experience in 2023. Our God does not change just because the year did. People like to say, we like to say, new year, new me. But with him, it's new year, same God. Our God doesn't do New Year's resolutions because perfect doesn't need to change. All knowing doesn't need to change. All sufficient, all powerful, almighty doesn't need to change. No, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the same God of Moses and Joshua, the same God of Samuel and David is still Jehovah Jireh in the breach, still Jehovah Rapha in the breach, still Jehovah Rohi, still Jehovah Shammah, still Jehovah Shalom. Yes, even in the breach, he doesn't stop being God in the gaps. No, Paul shows in 2 Corinthians 12 that in our weakness, he shows himself strong. So if anything, he's even more God in the gaps. He's even more God in the breach. So you shouldn't trust him less in the gaps, but oh, for grace to trust him more even in the breach. Oh, what? What? You didn't think he sees you down there? Ha! Not only does he see you in the breach, but Emmanuel, the God who pitched his tent among us, is down in there with you. So don't be confused by those single set of footprints on the valley floor at rock bottom in the breach. That's not you walking alone. That's him carrying your weakness, your sickness, your brokenness, all on his shoulders. Oh, this is a message for those in the breach. He's the one who will lead you to greener pastures and beside the still waters. He's the one who will restore your soul and lead you down the path of righteousness for his name's sake. He's the one keeping you in the valley of the shadow of death. It's his rod, it's his staff that comforts you. He's the one setting a table for you right in the middle of your enemies, right in the middle of the gap. Yes, God will cause you to feast even in the breach. He's the one anointing your head with oil. He's the one who's going to make your cup runneth over. Surely, surely, surely goodness and mercy will follow you all the days of your life. And in the name of Jesus, you will not be a permanent resident. You will not be a permanent inhabitant of the valley, of the void, of the gap, but dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's the message for 2023. That's a message for those in the breach.